The CDC says that 26 people have died from vaping-related illnesses in 21 states. And we've got 1,299 lung injury cases associated with vaping that have been reported to the CDC. Joining us now is Greg Conley, the president of the American Vaping Association. So, Greg, the Journal reporting that Congress is launching an investigation into whether or not e-cig companies use bots to push products to the public. Now, you were quoted in that article saying that no one pays attention to these bots. So why are you so not concerned, I guess, about something lawmakers are now prepared to look into?
Because engagement is what matters with social media. If you're a bot with 53 followers and you've sent out 1,000 tweets over a 3-month period, you may not equal through those 1,000 tweets the engagement that one person with 10,000 followers will reach from just one single tweet. And so there have been bots, but they haven't been driving the conversation. And there are now thousands of real-life vapors on social media that don't want to be portrayed as part of some Russian bot operation.
Greg, I think part of the tension right now between users, between the government, between some of these companies, is the fact that some of this advertising, in some specific company cases, appears to have been targeted at younger users, at teens. I think the advertising conversation around vaping right now is something that has particularly drawn the ire of lawmakers. And so while maybe the bots, in your view, don't really draw those kinds of eyeballs, certainly there appears to be a general displeasure, again, among lawmakers, among parents, most especially, I think, is driving this conversation with the advertising rules or practices of some companies in the vaping industry.
Sure. So by and large, marketing and advertising is low-hanging fruit. What we are concerned about, principally, is the ability of adults to access products that the Royal College of Physicians, Public Health England, and other public health experts have estimated to be at least 95% less harmful than smoking. I don't believe that any of the major companies in this space actually did intentionally market to youth, but you had a company like Juul that very clearly was targeting adult millennials. And you had inexperienced people that had no experience with tobacco and understanding how advertising has spillover. And that's what happened largely with Juul, is that they made a product that's great for adult smokers, but you have advertising to millennials, adult millennials, that ended up reaching teenage audiences, and teenage audiences discovering that with a high nicotine product, if you abuse it, you're able to get a head high. And that's the main problem that we have in the U.S. at the moment, is teens misusing these high nicotine products that help adult smokers get off, but they're using it in order to generate a head high.
I think a lot of the concerns there, too, is kind of around whether Juul or some of these other companies could have done more to kind of prevent what would have been the inevitable, because we know teens themselves, obviously cigarettes aren't being sold to teens. That was the way that it's been set up. Obviously, teens still have access to cigarettes. But I want to shift, Greg, over to the health concerns as well, because bots and advertising is one thing, but increasingly as we open this segment, there are a lot of health concerns built around these things. The vaping industry in general has pointed to the fact that these products are thought to be much safer than cigarettes. A lot of people have pointed to studies saying that they're 95% safer than cigarettes because of the way that some of these carcinogens are measured in the human body. But we just had a professor on last week, the first study to link cancer to vaping in mice. And I think we're learning a lot more about some of these threats here. So how much of a concern on the vaping industry is there that there hasn't really been that regulation when it comes to health, in the way that some of these statements might not be so founded on the science as people continue to look into the health concerns around vaping?
Well, first, as people are concerned about health issues, it's very important people know that across the country, about 13% of patients that have given interviews to the CDC or state health departments are now only claiming to have used nicotine. The problem around this country that the CDC is increasingly pointing to are illicit THC cartridges sold by drug dealers. That is what is causing the vast majority of all of these illnesses and deaths. As for the cancer in mice study that came out last week, the carcinogen that they claim is causing that cancer in mice, that carcinogen has been measured in the body of real-life human vapors. And if it's present at all, it's present at levels that are comparable to what the user of a nicotine gum or patch gets exposed to. In other words, you're looking at total carcinogen exposure magnitudes less than with cigarette smoke. And we know from years and years of science that mice and rat studies actually only end up giving effects that are transferable to humans, maybe 10% of the time. So it's a mistake to really lend too much credence to rat and mice studies.
Well, that was the interesting piece from that NYU study, was the fact that it may have been the case that the way that was measured, the main finding was the way that it was measured in humans might not have been thought to be correct when you talk about the way that you're measuring carcinogens in humans, because the main finding was that some of those indicators might actually stay within the cell rather than coming out of the cell the way that it's measured in saliva and urine, that a lot in the vaping industry have pointed to as facts in terms of saying that they're safer than cigarettes. What if more studies point to the fact that maybe that was an inaccurate way of saying that e-cigs are 95% safer than cigarettes?
So here's the bottom line. In Sweden, they use a smoke-free tobacco product called snus. And Sweden has the highest usage of tobacco in all of Europe by far, but they have the lowest tobacco-related disease and death rate. Why is that? It's because people are using the smoke-free product, and it is conferring health risks about 98 to 99% less than smoking combustible cigarettes. So this idea that exposing people to nicotine in a smoke-free form is something brand new and uncharted, it's not. We know what the levels of these chemicals in the body, and if people want to take disagreement with the measurements, you can look at the long-term epidemiology showing that long-term nicotine use in Sweden is not killing people when it's disconnected from smoke. That's the key in there.
Yeah, and so Greg, something that kind of stands out to me here is you're citing, research done in Sweden, Public Health UK, their studies feature prominently on your website. What is the divergence, I guess, between what the European consensus at this point seems to be around the risks associated with vaping and the conversation here in the U.S.? Because I think over the summer, things really went from sort of background, some teens are vaping, I guess, sometimes, to basically a full-on hysteria in terms of the risks for young users and what's happening to smokers, vapors, I guess, specifically here in the U.S. Why is there that divergence still in your view? And I guess why has the conversation gotten so hostile towards your industry in the U.S. in such a brief period of time when it appears that, on a continent where things are fairly similar to the U.S., we basically do not have any of this going on in the public discourse?
Yeah, so right now we are clearly in the middle of a moral panic in America. And as we saw with past moral panics with marijuana and alcohol, good public policy and good health policy rarely flows out of moral panics. But the bottom line is that we're seeing both youth and adult smoking plummet in this country. We just saw about a 28% decline in high school smoking as the experimentation with these products, which we don't approve of, but nonetheless, experimentation with vaping products is denormalizing cigarette smoking rapidly. But one big difference between the EU and the US is that in the EU, there are nicotine limits on products. And nicotine limits create issues. If you're a 1-pack-a-day, 2-pack-a-day smoker, you may need a higher nicotine product to actually get off of cigarettes. But as I stated earlier, in the US, unlike the EU, teens have discovered and they're able to access these high nicotine products that they can get head highs off of. And that's what is leading to so much usage. That's why Juul, likely the National Youth Tobacco Survey for 2019, will show that 70-80% plus of youth are using Juul or Juul-like products, not the refillable flavored nicotine vaping products available principally at vape shops.
All right, Greg Conley, president of the American Vaping Association. Thanks for your time. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.